think stigma is unfortunately a huge problem in when you talk about mental health, because 90% of people who have some sort of emotional or mental health problem unfortunately suffer from stigma and discrimination. So I guess the words and language we use to describe a young person's problem is absolutely vital, and I think it's really important to avoid anything that could increase, even if saying mental health issue, that could have a detrimental impact on people coming forward with their problems. So
one of the obvious stigmas it carries is the remote possibility that there may have to be a psychiatric assessment which refers people into inpatient units and takes away people's rights and responsibilities. That's such a remote possibility, and yet we all know that there is that possibility, and maybe that's where the stigmatisation comes from. So I wonder if it's about explaining to people what it is that a psychiatrist does, a psychologist does, a community psychiatric nurse might do, so that people can feel less worried about the potential for maybe their rights, for example, being taken away.
That's a tricky one, because I do believe that almost any word that gets used, if it's used for long enough, picks up stigma. So it's something that we have to be conscious about evolving continually. And I think the use of the word well-being at the moment is getting a bit of a trend on, and people are talking about mindfulness and yoga and well-being and improving your life in so many different ways. And I think that that is a better way to go forward. Mental health in itself is sort of a non-description of mental ill health, isn't it? So I think it's not entirely an accurate use for this with young people. It probably doesn't have much meaning to them.
I think it's quite a taboo topic, like we don't know that much about it because no one really tells us much.
There's no kind of understanding of this. It's probably one of the worst things about modern society. The mental health services, different people to talk to, the whole kind of thing is most under-talked about. It's just criminal.
Mental health wise, it's more about the stigma and the stereotypes that go along with it, and I think for a lot of young people today, I think they're more aware of it now than they were a few years ago, because it's suddenly just gotten really big, but people still don't talk about it. I think that that's an issue in itself, especially if you're someone that is affected by it and you feel like you can't talk to anybody because you're scared of what might happen.
You quite often hear something horrible's happened and so had schizophrenia, or so had some kind of mental health problem. So there's this constant reinforcing that mental health is associated with something very, very bad. And if that's the only message you're really hearing, why on earth would you want to identify with that?
Young people are very aware that there's something not right. There's something that isn't going on, and that can be difficult because sometimes young people can get a constant message from us adults that it's just adolescence, you'll grow out of it, it's just you being moody because that's what teenagers do, when in fact they really need some help. So I don't necessarily see a problem with using mental health, as long as we work hard to define what we mean by that.
Parents are terrified of mental illness. Parents are terrified of talking about mental illness. They're scared that by talking about it they'll create it. That somehow that you can pass on a mental illness by just mentioning its existence. Talking to other parents, there's a fear that by talking about, for example, self-harm, you're actually encouraging people to self-harm. And that fear will create a lot of that stigma. And I think we really need to be looking at people's well-being. We need to be saying words like mental illness, mental health, but also physical health, physical illness, and putting it all into our well-being. I think it's really important that we don't separate them.
I think families and people do hide. If the children has a mental illness, I think they do hide it away from society, because the idea of mental illness is so stigmatized and isolated from society itself that it's unacceptable to have a mental illness still in the 21st century. That if you do have a mental illness, then you hide it because it's it seems unnatural, or it's, like I said, a stigma. So I think society do hide it away.
Looking at my own family's experience, so my daughter, when she became ill at 15 with mental ill health, very severe problems, we felt that we were the only family going through what we were going through, and my daughter certainly felt that she was on her own with it, because we found that nobody talks about mental illness, and there's a lot of secrecy and a lot of shame around it. And so if someone is struggling, it makes it much harder for them to get help and to ask for help if nobody else is talking about it. And yet in reality, 1 in 5, statistically 1 in 5 young people are affected by symptoms of depression and anxiety and low body confidence. So in an average class of 30 young people, maybe 6 young people in that class at any one time may be struggling. So this is not an isolated problem, but something that actually is touching so many lives.
You get all these sort of things for major illnesses, but people forget that mental health is a major illness, and it does affect your life. It does affect everybody else's life that is in your circle. I think a lot more could be done about it, and I think a lot more awareness could be raised for it.
I think there's a real misunderstanding about mental health, but I think the main problem is that young people just don't have the education, and so they don't understand what it means, and they certainly don't understand how to label it themselves. If they're struggling, I think sometimes they're quick to be labelled as attention seekers, and everything that to do with mental health has really negative connotations. And so for young people, they really struggle to want to label themselves, because again, that separates them from their peers, and they're desperately trying to fit in.
I think everyone gets down, everyone gets anxious. There is a point where it tips over into illness, but actually you catch people on different days and you'd say different things. And I think we try and put things in boxes, and one of the reasons we do that is so people can access services. Unless you tick the right boxes, you can't get the help. So I can understand why we want to put labels on things, but actually sometimes it doesn't help. Sometimes we forget that anxiety is a normal part of growing up, that feeling that things are difficult, that things are hard is a normal part of growing up. But equally, if we normalise everything, then people who need help don't get it. So that line is really difficult, and there isn't an answer to that other than to say that we need to take all of it seriously. We can't say, oh, well, your anxiety isn't bad enough to be clinical, therefore we can't help you with it. We need to be looking at young people who are coming forward saying, I'm really anxious about this, and teaching them about what anxiety is, what causes it, what goes on in their brains, why it makes them feel physically how they do, so that they then have the tools to be able to stop it becoming something that's a clinical problem.
I'd love to see it on a par with physical health. So we talk about physical education, we talk about mental education in the same breath. Keep ourselves physically well, keep ourselves mentally well, no difference, destigmatising from day one. And actually a lot of the things we do to keep ourselves physically well are similar. Good diet, exercise, getting outside, spending time doing things we love. Those things keep ourselves both mentally and physically well. So just in the same breath, right from day one.
The point that it all comes down to is this lack of actually understanding for people who aren't in don't have mental illnesses, can't understand and can't relate and can't sort of put an opinion to whether talking helps because they haven't been through it. And I think the best way to get that through to young people and sort of get that through to them is through the education system.
It's that stigma of you're mental, and people kind of do sort of freak out with that, being stigmatized with that, or hearing that people don't understand it, and because we're not educating them, or they're not educated and they don't understand, people are gonna freak out over it, because if you don't know something, you don't know what you don't know.